Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to True Staffing Partners webinar in a series of webinars. This one centered around thank you notes, going beyond courtesy to win the job. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to let everybody fill the room and enjoy this playback online down the road. Let me introduce my esteemed guest, who is an amazing privacy practitioner, one of my favorite clients and customers, Jody Daniels, founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors. Jody, say hi to all of our guests who are joining us today all around the world.
Well, hello, everybody from all around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I can't do hellos in all the different languages, so you just get hello.
Jody has an amazing podcast. If you have not heard it already, she said privacy, he said security. She comes first, right?
Of course.
Of course. How dare me for even asking. I'm glad my assumption was correct. With her and her husband, who are amazing. And I had the great pleasure of being a guest on their podcast last month. And we talked all about data privacy and what's happening in the job market. And if you missed it, you should check it out and become a regular subscriber. It's a great show. And Jody and her husband are celebrating their 15-year anniversary this year, correct?
We did. We celebrated it in January. It was lots of fun.
Congratulations. And happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. I saved this really awesome, beautiful pink, multicolored pink shirt for this very webinar. And I'm so excited. I also really enjoyed the music. I was dancing, it was grooving. It's fun.
Yeah, I like broadcast music. I'm like Miles Tiller in the Super Bowl. I can jam to whatever you put me on hold to anytime.
It's pretty awesome. Now, are you a chocolate or the little candy heart person on Valentine's
I'm
Day?
all chocolate, dark
chocolate. Is it plain chocolate or does it have a filling or like a crunch?
I like it plain, but I'll have filling too. I'm not a picky chocolate eater. You can cover just about anything in chocolate and I'll eat it.
I like chocolate with nuts. I need the crunch.
Yes, I was a Crunch Bar kid, but I have evolved and diversified my tastes since then, Jody. Well, let's dive in. I know everyone's really excited to hear our perspective. I think we've got a lot of kind of diverse and maybe unique perspectives on what seems like a kind of throwaway topic, but I think those that treat the thank you note as a throwaway might be throwing away their opportunity for a job. So my first question to kick it off is, and by the way, everybody, this whole idea came out of a conversation that Jody and I had after we recorded our podcast episode together, and it just came up as a professional curiosity. And I said, oh my gosh, we've got to have this conversation live in front of as many other people as that will listen and share these two perspectives because they're very different. Jody, let's start with the basic question. Is it necessary? Does a job seeker have to send a thank you note after a job interview?
So my vote is yes. I really believe strongly in the thank you note, and I have a lot of reasons for it. I think it shows thoughtfulness and respect for the person's time. While in this conversation, I might say, thank you so much, Jared, for your time today. I really enjoyed our conversation. That I can say it again in another form. Some people like oral, some people like written, but it just also shows I took time to reflect on our conversation, summarize something interesting that happened, and be able to communicate with you. And it also shows how you can communicate and how you can write, which from an employer's perspective, they might find really important to the job.
So I want to just noodle it now on one of the things you said, which was take the time to reflect. How much time should elapse between the end of the interview and this thank you note? And we'll get into in what form the thank you note should arrive to the interviewer in a second, but what's an appropriate amount of time? Should it come when I hit the pavement after the interview, hours later, that day, the next day, that week, within a week's time? What's appropriate in your opinion?
I was having this conversation with someone recently, and we kind of agreed, we think within 24 hours, within a business day, is what makes the most sense. If it's a morning conversation, if you do it right away, it's it's almost like dating, right? You can't call or text right away and say, "Hey, you had a really great time." You have to give some space between. And I think it's sort of the same with the job situation, but in the regular business world, acknowledgement of email often is expected within a day, right? If you just think about it in a business context, you might not have the answer, but oftentimes people want to say, "Hey, thanks for the note. I'm looking into it. I'll get back to you." I think the same is true for a thank you note.
So it kind of answers the next question I have, which is anyone still sending written thank you notes? Can they get there in time? Should I overnight a handwritten thank you note to you, Jody, so that it gets there in 24 hours? And I may not have the address, so how do I get it? What's this? Is it worth debating handwritten versus electronic thank you?
I think we're really, I mean, lots of people love handwritten notes. I think when it comes to a job, by the time you honestly would get it in the mail and it would arrive to the potential address that you might have found for the person, it will never get to the person on time and that job is going to be long gone. I think nowadays it's email and that's what people are expecting. That's how people are communicating. And if you want to go above and beyond and maybe depending on the process, you could certainly do a handwritten one, but I really think we're just in emailville.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess it depends on the intent. And I think if you separate the intent of giving courtesy and thanks, and also some of the other things that I think are necessary in a thank you note, which we'll talk about in a second, you're right. Too much time has passed by the time a written letter gets there. But it also depends on which round of interview you're on. And I think if you've been through 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews, maybe it is appropriate to send some kind of handwritten, thoughtful to whoever the primary point of contact is. But it shouldn't matter whether or not you've been notified as to whether you've gotten or not gotten the job by the time they get that letter, right? Anything that's handwritten has to be a separate agenda other than the rules of engagement for getting this job. And I agree with you. If you're sending that thank you letter, which you should, which you need to, I agree with you, it needs to be within 24 hours and reinforce a couple of things, not the least of which that you're still interested in the position. We found, and we've talked about this endlessly on different webinars, that in the first quarter of 2022, jobs were going on and off the market within 8 to 12 business days. So I just don't think job seekers anymore, with the new speed of hire, which even today, as the market has slowed down a little bit, for a mid-market professional or an entry-level professional is still less than 30 days from the time they get a resume to the time somebody's accepted an offer. It's too short a window of time, I think, for the calligraphy, right? It has to be much more about what you're saying, how quickly you're saying it, and used as a weapon in order to help you advance in the job search process.
I think the piece that's important to add is in this era of remote work, you have a lot of people who are at home, and I might not want to give you my home address. And, if you send it to whoever the corporation is and the person's not there, it might be a challenge to distinguish yourself. What I do think is kind of cool is a video thank you note, a little bit more than just an email thank you note.
Fascinating. See, I have never received a video thank you note, but I think there's so much opportunity for failure in a video, because most people think that they are going to be their best impromptu self by just talking into a camera and saying thanks, and usually that backfires. On the flip end, I would say people who try to read a script and are not good at it and don't know how to read copy on camera can also come off very inauthentic, right? So it's this constant balance, I think, with video, right? It's like Zooming. You have to be very careful about how authentic you are versus how business professional you are, even though you've invited people into your home. And I was very resistant to Zooming when the pandemic first happened because it felt invasive. Now it's, a expectation of availability, and an increasing expectation of professionalism. But we'll talk about Zooming on another day. I want to keep going on thank you letters. What are you looking for really in that thank you letter? What are some of the best thank you letters that have stood out for you, and why have they stood out as great thank you letters?
The ones that have stood out are ones that really summarize an interesting point in the conversation and that say how they're going to bring their skills to help the organization and why they want to work for the organization. It's a little bit about how they're going to help and then also why they're a great candidate.
So there's a question in our chat, which is a great question, which are what are the top 3 things job seekers should include in their thank you notes? And I think this is one of them, right? Point number 1, I agree 100%. It's the first piece of guidance we give people about thank you notes, which is you have to reiterate, you have to re-articulate points, or at least one salient point of the interview to show the interviewer that what they have said has been heard, received, and can be re-articulated in writing within a 24-hour period. That connecting those dots and seeing that happen within a job seeker is, I think, the main reason why we ask people to send thank you or expect people to send thank you notes. What else, Jody? What's another main thing you're looking for in a thank you note?
Well, this is an opportunity for the job seeker to summarize why they're great for the job. What are they going to bring that's different from somebody else? At the same time, if you can remember a fun fact about the conversation, it's often not always a business piece. Maybe it's you've connected about where you went to school, or we've talked about Zooming. If it was a virtual interview, maybe you noticed something in their home. Kind of look at what the conversation is. Try and bring your personality to it and how you would really show up in a professional way that's going to make me remember who you are.
How about no typos?
Oh, yeah. Well, was a no-brainer. You should definitely use the spell check and Grammarly and no typos. Oh, and this one, because I get it personally all the time. You should spell the person's name correctly.
If somebody has a typo in their thank you email, is that an automatic disqualification for you?
I think it depends on what the typo is and how much and how long and kind of everything else in it. But if they spell my name wrong, that's not a good sign.
So a Jody, that's it. It's game over.
Jody, that is not a good thing. And
I get it all the time. Not Jody, I get JERAD and all sorts of fun.
Right. So, that one doesn't work. And then we've had some, I mean, we're having this conversation. Well, maybe we'll get to it of how important it is, but when you don't get it, then people go in a pile when you don't get it.
So if someone does not send a thank you note at all, is that an immediate disqualification?
I've taken we feel pretty strongly over here in our little universe that thank you notes are a very important requirement because it shows everything that we've been talking about. It shows interest, it shows respect, it shows thoughtfulness, it shows how you're going to be able to communicate. And certain roles are all a little bit different. And in our world, there's a lot of communication that's going to be happening to others internally and externally. And I want to hire really kind, thoughtful people. I want someone who's going to say, thank you so much for helping me with this. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for getting this on time. The thank you is just, they should be thank you people. And the thank you note is kind of an extension of being the thank you person.
So it goes beyond just courtesy and saying thanks, which is obvious, but I see a lot of people, that's all they do, right? So to me, that's an immediate disqualification. If I get a thank you email from somebody immediately after an interview and it just says, hey, I just wanted to really thank you for your time. I'm interested in the position. That's kind of a disqualification for me, right? If they're coming to work for my organization, not if I'm necessarily representing them to others, because I would then coach them. But for me, it's a pretty quick disqualification, right? Because you haven't done all the other things that we just talked about, which show me that you can connect the dots between having a conversation, ingesting that information and re-articulating it, and then doing it very thoughtfully. But you bring up another topic, which I think is really important, which is tone and being able to express emotionality and create a sense of feeling like kindness, like generosity. And I know that's just as important for job seekers too. So let me ask you this. How much is too much? Is there such a thing as a too long thank you note?
It's not meant to be a cover letter and it's not meant to summarize your resume. I shouldn't see any of those things again. In my view, it should be, thank you so much for this great conversation. I really enjoyed that we spoke about X, Y, and Z. These are some of your goals. I can help you on A, B, and C, something along those lines, but not my experience at this school or at this job is going to be perfect for you over here. It's not meant to be a regurgitation of the conversation we just had or your resume. It's a really small snippet that is summarizing for the person, quite honestly. Almost think of meeting minutes, but in a really condensed executive summary version, and how they're going to be able to help whatever the goal of the job and the company is. There should be my skills can help achieve XYZ. And I really appreciated your time. I've even had some to say, even if I'm not the right fit, I really appreciate your time. I really respect what you've been doing. That goes a long way. That makes me think, wow, you really are a nice person over here. Even if you weren't the right fit, you thanked me for something.
Yeah, so I actually don't think that it can be too long unless it's got the wrong content in it. And I'll use an example that literally happened this week. I've got a candidate who's incredibly articulate, very good writer, went out on an interview, did not have all the skill sets they were looking for, but used his thank you email to connect the dots once more in writing to show what they needed, what he was going to do to bridge the gap in the knowledge, and what the end result and impact would be for the company. And he went through 4 or 5 of these points in a thank you email. I mean, this was a good 400 words, right? It wasn't 130 characters. This was 400, 500 words. It was thoughtful. I had to scroll a little bit, which normally I wouldn't recommend. But because it was all about connecting those dots, it wasn't regurgitation. It was thoughtful connecting of ideas that were from, here's what you need, here's what I'm going to do to get you what you need, and here will be the impact and result once I've done it for the organization. I mean, it was beautiful. Guy got a job offer 2 days later.
Now that makes a lot of sense. He didn't regurgitate. He was trying to help make sure the person understood how he could do X, Y, and Z, and I'm assuming how that could help fill whatever role it was that they're trying to fill.
And it also expressed, I think, a level of thoughtfulness and detail, right? Because if it's detail, it draws a certain kind of listening from the reader that says, oh, wow, this is the level of detail he's going to give my attorneys or my end customers, and the level of thoughtfulness and responsiveness that we can expect from him when he's doing his job. And I think that made them say, okay, he may not have some of the tech skills that we need. We'll teach him that. He's got things that we can't teach. And that's been demonstrated in this thank you note. And that's an actual story. My staff is laughing right now on Slack because they know exactly what I'm talking about.
But they're real. I mean, these are important stories. It really can make the difference. If he didn't do that, he might not have gotten the job. And maybe they would select somebody else. Or contrary to that, right? If you don't send the thank you note, you're very likely not going to get the opportunity at all at certain places.
So now, Jody, I'm going to ask you the question I asked you when we spoke, and I'm going to see if your answer is the same. And I think it's the most interesting question of the day. Do you tell candidates on interviews that you expect them to send you a thank you note?
I did not do that. Before our conversation, I have a good story to tell based on that. So no, I traditionally have never said, I expect a thank you note. What's been interesting is a few times people have said, I want your email so that I can send you a thank you note, which I like to hear that. But traditionally, no. And the reason is because in the real world, I'm not going to tell the person, go say thank you to all these people. Go make sure that you are a gracious, kind person. I don't want to do that. And I want to know that that individual is going to be able to follow up, because for me, that's really important in all the roles that we have. People need to do XYZ. And when they don't, because we don't, sometimes we're all humans and we forget or we move on or we want reminders. That thank you note to me is the ability for you to be proactive and follow through on something. And that's what that signals to me. After our conversation where you shared that you do say that, I tried it out and it worked. And then here's what happened. I shared this individual with a couple other team members, and guess what happened? They didn't get the thank you note.
Ha! Because they didn't tell them to send it.
Right. So again, I can't tell every time what to do. So if you're going to know to send it for me, but you're not going to send it to the other person, well, what am I supposed to do about that? You're really great at taking direction. But if I want someone who is able to think on their own, this is why I don't like to tell people what it should say. I want to kind of see on their own what they can do.
What a revelation. And as I hear you say that, it makes me say, oh, like how deliberate should that be? Where if you're going to have a multi-factored interview process, which most people do when it's a full-time position, right? You're going to go through at least 2 rounds of interviews, which is typical. Sometimes 3, sometimes more, depending on the caliber of the hire within the organization. One level, they're going to say, this is what we expect, and the other, they're not. Look, I think part of it also is, I don't know, and I'll date myself here, that younger generations share the same ideology that we do, that a thank you note is expected. Um, and that doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong either. And I try to see it from that perspective. Their time is as valuable as mine, and it is. But you are applying for a job, right? And I'll say this, that instinct that you've described, that proactive gene, which I think is a really important one to evaluate, to me, on a first round interview, particularly with less experienced hires, is less important for me to evaluate than their ability to take direction, their ability to write thoughtfully and articulately in all the ways that we've just described. And I know I'm going to harp on this, but their ability to spell check and proofread, right? Because to me, that's the kiss of death. The minute you do that, you're fighting back against an assumption that you are either lazy or incompetent for the rest of your relationship with somebody. And I don't want any of them. We have a 0 tolerance policy on typos. So, we take it real seriously, because I think our customers do too. So, to me, I want to see those 3 things. And I tell people, and my 3 new hires who I hired in January are laughing, because I told all of them, I'm like, you're going to write me a thank you email. It needs to say these things. I need to see how you say these things. I expect it to come within this much amount of time. If it comes later than that, I'm going to wonder why, because I've given you this very specific direction. And all of that is really informed a lot about what to expect in terms of their performance here at the company. I think it can go both ways, but I love the idea of it deliberately going both ways, because I also think what you've described is something that's very hard to suss out on an interview as a hiring manager, which is, will this person treat executives at different levels of hierarchy within the organization differently because they hold and wield more authority and power within the organization, and therefore will get a different level of responsiveness or service from them? And that's exactly what happened in this example that you just gave, right? The CEO and founder got a different kind of lip service than everybody else at the team. And I think that also, whether deliberate or not, speaks intrinsically to potential conflicts or character issues or cultural issues that you may run into as this person begins to not only integrate with the team, but look to move ahead and up within that team.
That is very well said. And I do hear your point on the generational piece. That is real. I think I've had experience with both people, but I stand firm. I feel like there's still a lot of younger folks who are go-getters and want to kind of stand out. And I think that's the other piece about this whole thank you note piece, is it's about putting yourself ahead and differentiating compared to the competition, because likely there's more than one person being interviewed. What's going to make you different? And I think all you got is your interview, and then how do you remind the person how awesome and great it was, and like pick me with a big sign on it. And I think that's the thank you note.
We've got a couple of questions with the few minutes we have left. It's been such a fun conversation. I love talking with you. What about thank you to HR, asking them to forward to your interviewers?
I personally think in the conversation, you should get the direct person's contact information. I know in some really large companies it doesn't always happen and it goes to HR, but now you have someone in the middle that you're hoping is going to hit forward. And I don't like that. I don't want that to interfere with the goodness that you're doing. So in the conversation, I think it's really reasonable. You could even say, if I have any additional questions or if I have any additional thoughts, can I give you, how can I reach out to you? And I mean, unless you really are not going to get this job, I can't imagine an interviewer not giving their email.
So I would give a couple pieces of guidance. The first of which is sometimes I think if you only have the HR's contact info and they don't want to share the rest of that info, my recommendation would be to reach out to someone on LinkedIn. You can find the person on LinkedIn. You can send a connection request. You get 300 characters to send that request. That's an opportunity for you to even show again, like, hey, I sent an email to so-and-so in HR. I wanted to send a quick connection here in case you wanted to engage further, had any additional follow-up questions to me. Thank you so much for today's interview. It can be much shorter there because you have a limited amount of characters and people are going to understand that are hiring managers, they get it. But I do think that additional follow-up is appropriate. I'll even add this. I don't mind if somebody sends me a thank you email when they have my email that is longer and thoughtful, right? It's more than 300 characters. And then also, almost at the same time, sends me a LinkedIn connection request that says, I sent you an email. I want to let you know, just in case it goes to spam, since we haven't chatted before, I put more detail there, but I wanted to connect with you here too and make myself available to you directly as a resource, something like that. That way you've hit all angles, and then there's no chance of that actual hiring manager saying, well, they didn't send a thank you email. But I did, but I sent it to HR and they said they were going to forward it. Right?
Those are great suggestions. I 100% agree. Love those. Brilliant. Do those.
Thank you. All right, we've got a few more questions here. How should a hiring manager respond to a thank you note?
That's an interesting one. I don't think a hiring manager always has to respond to a thank you note.
And I don't disagree with you, but if they do you think that that's signaling to the job seeker that they are in fact interested in their candidacy simply by responding?
I think it depends on what they say. If it's just, thank you so much for your time, that's pretty neutral. Thank you so much, and I enjoyed meeting you as well. That's a more positive signal. I think if there's if the interviewee has signaled that they're interviewing at other places, hint, hint, company, make your decision quickly, and the hiring manager doesn't want the candidate to go somewhere else because they really like them, but they have to go through a process, then they could respond, of course, in the guidelines of HR laws in your company, with some type of hint. We really enjoyed the conversation. We really liked your skill set or the story in XYZ. So I think it could signal, but I think the signaling is relative to what makes sense in that situation.
I give this guidance to my customers. I say, if you respond back with anything other than received and thank you so much for your time as well, you are indicating that you are interested in that candidate, whether you intend to or not, in that candidate's mind 9 times out of 10. So I just don't think it's a good practice. I think you can respond or not respond at all, but responding with anything more than that is flirtation. Let's be really candid. It's flirtation and you're leading them on. So if you don't want to lead them on, don't do it. It brought up one last question that was a really good one, and I just lost it. Oh, well, maybe it will come to me. We've got 2 minutes left. Final thoughts, Jody Daniels from Red Clover Advisors, on thank you notes or anything you'd want our listeners to take away from this conversation.
Well, I've had so much fun. I feel so passionate on this topic. And it's because, look, there's a lot of jobs and there's also a lot of candidates. And if you are a job seeker listening and you really want a job, then this is what will differentiate you. Spend the time, spell check, get the people's names right, put something thoughtful in it. And I firmly believe that could be the difference between you landing the job you want and not.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Jody, so much for being with me and True Staffing Partners here today. If you're looking for consulting and privacy, call Jody Daniels. She is one of the best. You will get exceptional service from her and her team. I know, because I placed some people there and they are fantastic. And if you're looking to staff for e-discovery, cybersecurity, or data privacy, True Staffing Partners is your one-stop shop. Give us a call anytime. Thank you so much for joining us, and look for more content from me and my team and other amazing guests just like Jody about how to improve your interview job search process. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye, everybody.